Psalm 124, escaped the trap. Every evil net breaks and you go free. Psalm 124 is one of the most powerful declarations of divine rescue ever recorded. It is a song of remembrance, a hymn of gratitude from those who have narrowly escaped destruction, not by their own strength, but because the Lord himself intervened. This psalm reminds us that life is filled with traps, nets, and snares, spiritual, emotional, and even relational, carefully set to stop our progress and silence our destiny. Yet it also reveals a deep truth. Every plan of darkness fails when God rises on your behalf. David, the psalmist, looks back and says, "If it had not been the Lord who was on our side." Psalm 124, 1. In that phrase lies a universe of meaning. It's not just a poetic reflection, it's the testimony of every believer who has been through impossible odds, felt the weight of betrayal, sensed the breath of the enemy on their neck, and yet lived to tell the story, because when God is on your side, no trap can hold you. This psalm invites us to reflect deeply on the traps we have escaped, the ones we saw and the ones we didn't. It reveals how divine intervention breaks the invisible nets, the emotional prisons, and the cycles of oppression that seek to cage the soul. Each verse becomes a spiritual key, unlocking the reality that freedom is not something you earn. It is something God grants to those who trust in him completely. Let us explore Psalm 124 through 5 dimensions, each revealing a layer of divine deliverance. As we unfold its mystery, you will understand that every evil net, every scheme that was set against you, was already known by God, and he has already broken it. What you will discover is not merely poetic insight, but spiritual truth. You are alive today because the Lord made the snare break. The snare set in secret, how darkness plots against the chosen. Every believer who walks with God will at some point face invisible opposition. There are traps woven in the unseen realms, plans that seek to halt your destiny before it manifests. These traps are not always obvious. They can come disguised as opportunity, love, success, or even comfort. The devil rarely attacks where you are weak. He strikes where you are confident. Psalm 124 opens our eyes to this deeper warfare. When David writes, "If it had not been the Lord who was on our side, when men rose up against us," he is referring to moments of unseen danger. There are men, systems, people, and spiritual forces that rise without warning. You might be unaware that while you were resting, conversations were being had to undermine your purpose. Words were being spoken to defile your reputation, or thoughts were being planted to lead you into compromise. Every evil plan starts in secrecy, but the Lord exposes it before it reaches completion. The language of the psalm is not random. The snare is broken, and we are escaped. A snare is a hidden trap, something you don't notice until it tightens around you. It represents deceitful invitations, toxic attachments, destructive thoughts, or environments that slowly drain your spiritual vitality. The snare is designed not to kill instantly but to immobilize, to keep you stuck long enough for fear, guilt, or shame to take over. That is how spiritual paralysis begins. But here lies the mystery of divine deliverance. God doesn't always prevent the snare from being set. He makes sure it breaks. He allows his people to walk near danger, not so they fall into it, but so they learn who truly keeps them. You might have walked through seasons where everything seemed fine, until suddenly the ground gave way beneath you. Yet even in that fall, there was a cushion of grace. That invisible hand that caught you was the same hand that broke the net. Every evil trap, whether born of jealousy, witchcraft, manipulation, or demonic interference, must face the superior power of divine justice. No force of darkness can outsmart the one who sees in secret. Psalm 124 reminds us that while men conspire in hidden rooms, Heaven observes in silence until the appointed moment comes when the snare must snap open and the captive walks free. If you examine your life, you will realize that you have escaped more than you can count. You survived betrayals that should have destroyed your heart. You endured losses that should have broken your faith. You walked out of situations that others never recovered from. These are not coincidences. They are divine interventions. God has been canceling invisible traps for you long before you knew they existed. There is also a prophetic dimension here. Many people today live under unseen snares, curses spoken in ignorance, agreements made in fear, generational covenants that continue to whisper through bloodlines. But when Psalm 124 is declared, something happens in the spiritual atmosphere. The nets begin to tear. The old cords that tied the soul start to dissolve. God himself steps in as the rescuer of destinies. Remember this. The snare doesn't just represent an event, it represents a spiritual technology of captivity. It can take the form of temptation, discouragement, distraction, or even false security. But every snare shares one weakness. It cannot hold what God has chosen to release. The psalmist declares that the snare is broken, not loosened. That means complete disarmament. The trap doesn't merely fail, it collapses. The one who set it ends up trapped in their own net. In the unseen world, when God decides to free a person, the sound of broken cords echoes like thunder. Angels move, walls shake, chains melt, the very devices of darkness turn to dust. What was meant to silence you becomes the testimony of your freedom. This is what it means to walk under divine protection, not a life without danger, but a life where every plan of the enemy backfires. You are not reading these words by accident. There is something in your life right now, a pattern, a fear, a repeated attack that represents a snare. But this psalm announces a prophetic verdict that net is breaking right now. God is about to expose what was hidden and destroy what was designed to hold you. You are coming out not limping, but liberated. And when you walk out, you must remember who kept you. The psalmist doesn't give credit to strategy, wisdom, or luck. He gives it to the Lord, because it was never about the strength of the bird. It was about the power of the hand that broke the net. If you have ever escaped something you couldn't explain, a near accident, a wrong decision that somehow turned right, a friendship that ended just in time, you have lived Psalm 124. You have seen the invisible mercy of God at work. And now, as you walk forward, do not forget to declare, "If it had not been the Lord who was on my side." Stay with this revelation. Let it sink in. The same God who made you escape before will do it again. No snare will hold your soul. No plan will cage your destiny. The Lord who delivered David is still delivering his people today. If you believe this message was for you, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, because each revelation you receive here will prepare you for the freedom that God is bringing next. The waters would have overwhelmed us when trouble comes like a flood. There are moments in life when the intensity of opposition rises like water breaking through a dam. It starts as a slow leak, a manageable inconvenience, but soon the situation grows into a torrent. Psalm 124 captures this with the imagery of floodwaters, an ancient metaphor that carries both literal and spiritual power. David says, "Then they would have swallowed us alive when their anger was kindled against us. Then the waters would have overwhelmed us. The stream would have gone over our soul." In these words, we hear not just poetry, but the confession of a man who has felt the surge of calamity pressing against his very existence. The waters are not only external forces, they represent emotions, systems, and demonic storms designed to drown the believer's faith. When the psalmist speaks of being swallowed alive, it reflects those moments when life moves faster than comprehension, when pain, fear, or betrayal strikes with no warning, leaving you gasping for air. This swallowing force can manifest as circumstances beyond human control. Sickness that comes unannounced, financial ruin that arrives through deceit, or the sudden collapse of trust in those you believed were your allies. These experiences are not unique to ancient times. They are as present today as ever. The floods of this age take many forms. Information overload, social pressure, emotional exhaustion, spiritual confusion. Each is designed to pull the believer under, to make them forget who is truly in control. When water covers you, vision disappears. Underneath the flood, the world turns dark and sound distorts. Spiritually, this represents seasons when faith seems drowned by doubt, when prayer feels like it bounces off the ceiling, when God's silence feels heavier than the storm itself. It is precisely in such times that Psalm 124 shines as a testimony that divine rescue is real. The psalmist is not imagining deliverance from mild discomfort. He is describing survival from a catastrophe that should have consumed him entirely. The waters would have gone over our soul means the trial didn't just threaten the body or reputation. It reached for the innermost self, the essence of identity. This phrase reveals something profound about the nature of spiritual warfare. The enemy doesn't merely want to harm your outer life, he wants to drown your soul. He seeks to fill your inner space with anxiety, fear, and despair until you forget that God is your anchor. But just when the flood reaches its highest point, divine intervention changes everything. In the unseen world, there is a limit set by God, an invisible command that says, "Thus far shall you come, and no farther." That limit exists even for the floods that rage against your life. The water may rise, but it cannot drown what God has declared to live. Think of Noah in the ark. The waters covered the earth, but within that vessel of covenant there was peace. The same principle applies to every believer who abides in God. The flood may roar outside, but inside his presence there is safety. What overwhelms others becomes a stage for your testimony. The flood that came to destroy ends up carrying you to higher ground. It is an ancient paradox. What was sent to drown you becomes the instrument of your elevation. When the psalmist speaks of being overwhelmed, he is not denying the terror of the moment. He is acknowledging the miracle of endurance. You are still standing, not because you are stronger than the storm, but because grace refused to let go of you. Many people live with the memory of floods they survived, heartbreaks that could have killed their hope, disappointments that almost extinguished their light. If you reflect deeply, you will recognize that God's hand was there, redirecting the current, holding you in the undertow, keeping your soul from dissolving. Every flood is both a trial and a revelation. It exposes what cannot be shaken. When everything you depend on collapses, what remains is the truth of who God is. That is why the psalmist doesn't glorify the storm. He glorifies the one who held him above it. In your own journey, there have been floods that came without warning. Perhaps you trusted someone who betrayed you deeply. Perhaps you invested years of faith into something that fell apart overnight. Perhaps the weight of loss has left you numb. These experiences are not proof that God abandoned you. They are evidence that the enemy saw your potential and tried to drown it before it matured. But Psalm 124 declares the outcome. Blessed be the Lord, who has not given us as prey to their teeth. The flood may have roared, but you were not swallowed. You came out breathing. You came out stronger. Spiritual floods also take the form of internal turmoil. There are moments when emotions rise uncontrollably, waves of anger, waves of fear, waves of guilt or shame. They crash repeatedly until the soul feels tired of resisting, but God never asks you to swim in your own strength. The moment you cry out to Him, a new current appears, one that carries you upward. Divine mercy becomes your lifeboat. Even when you think you are sinking, His Spirit keeps you afloat. There is a power that resists the gravity of despair, and that power is grace. This psalm invites you to reinterpret your past floods. You didn't survive by luck or coincidence. You survived because purpose was still breathing inside you. You were preserved because your voice, your prayer, your existence still had meaning in the kingdom of God. Every flood you endured is now a testimony that will strengthen others who feel like they are drowning. There is nothing wasted in God's economy. The same waters that terrified you once will one day reflect the light of your deliverance. When David spoke of the flood, he wasn't writing from a comfortable distance. He had been chased, betrayed, and hunted. He knew what it felt like to run out of options, to see the enemy's army pressing in from every direction. Yet each time, something miraculous happened. The tide turned. What looked like the end became the beginning of a new season. This is not romantic language, it is spiritual law. The enemy always overplays his hand, and when he does, God transforms his attack into your promotion. The floods are also symbolic of collective oppression. Nations, families, or even communities can be submerged under waves of corruption, fear, or moral decay. Yet within those floods, God raises remnants, people who still believe, who still pray, who still speak light in the darkness. The psalm is their anthem. It says, "We are still here. The waters tried, but they failed." The survival of faith itself in a hostile world is the greatest miracle of all. Every time a believer refuses to give in to despair, the flood loses its power. There is another layer of meaning here, psychological and emotional. Floods can symbolize overwhelming thoughts, the rush of negativity that invades the mind when things fall apart. Anxiety floods the heart with what-ifs, depression floods it with "it's over," and guilt floods it with "I should have." In those moments, you must anchor your heart in the unchanging truth that God remains Lord even underwater. He walks on what others sink in. He speaks peace to what others fear. When Jesus calmed the storm in the Gospels, it was the embodiment of Psalm 124, the demonstration that divine authority is greater than any natural or spiritual flood. Your soul is not designed to live underwater. It is meant to breathe faith. That's why every time despair rises, the Spirit of God stirs a new wind. You may not see it, but it lifts you slowly, gently, persistently, until once again your head is above the waters. The flood never lasts forever. Every storm has an expiration date, and deliverance has an appointment. The psalmist understood this when he said, "Our help is in the name of the Lord, who made heaven and earth. The one who made the waters commands them. The one who allows the test also sets the limit." Sometimes God allows the flood so that false supports can be swept away. You will never know what truly sustains you until everything else fails. It is in that raw, exposed moment that the reality of divine help becomes undeniable. When the waves of uncertainty strip away every illusion of control, what remains is simple faith. The pure knowing that if God does not hold you, you will not survive. That faith is not weakness, it is power. It anchors you deeper than fear can reach. Think of the imagery again. The stream would have gone over our soul. Notice that David doesn't say the body, he says the soul. The greatest danger of life's floods is not physical death, but spiritual drowning, the loss of hope, the corrosion of trust, the slow fading of joy. That is why God's first act of deliverance is often internal. Before he calms the storm around you, he calms the storm within you. He teaches you to breathe again in the middle of chaos. He restores your song before the waters subside. That inner peace becomes your ark. It carries you through everything. There are many who feel as though they are living in Psalm 124 right now. The flood of bad news, the flood of confusion, the flood of fear about the future. It all feels relentless. But hear this truth: every flood eventually drains back into the sea, and every storm eventually runs out of rain. The word of God endures. The presence of God remains. When the floods recede, what will be left standing is not destruction, but revelation. You will see that God was never absent. He was guiding you through the current, teaching you how to trust when nothing made sense. Sometimes the flood you face is the very tool that carries you to destiny. The Israelites crossed through waters to reach freedom. The Red Sea did not destroy them, it destroyed their oppressors. Likewise, the flood in your life may not be sent to destroy you, but to drown what has been chasing you. When you emerge on the other side, you will not only be free, your enemies will have lost their power. The waters that threaten to consume you will become the walls that protect you. There is a reason David ends the psalm with praise. Blessed be the Lord. That phrase is not casual gratitude. It is the cry of one who has seen the impossible reversed. When you've been through the flood and lived, praise becomes natural. It flows like breath. You realize that your survival is not random. It is a sign. God spared you because your testimony will set others free. You carry within you the memory of what He did, and that memory becomes a weapon against future fear. In this life, the floods will come again. Jesus Himself said, "In this world, you will have trouble." But He also said, "Be of good cheer. I have overcome the world." The overcomer lives within you. You are not a victim of the flood. You are the proof that it cannot prevail. Psalm 124 is your declaration that what could have destroyed you has become your platform of praise. The waters rose, but they could not extinguish the fire of purpose burning within you. If you are reading this and you feel the waters rising, if you feel like life has cornered you and you can't breathe, take a moment to remember this psalm. God has not abandoned you. The same hand that lifted David will lift you. The same power that broke the net will break every limitation. The flood will not last forever. Soon you will look back and say with conviction, "If it had not been the Lord who was on my side, the waters would have swallowed me alive." Hold on to that truth, because your survival is not in question. It is already written. The flood was not your end. It was the proof that you are chosen, protected, and destined. Every wave that rises against you serves a higher purpose. When the tide recedes, your faith will be stronger, your discernment sharper, your heart softer. You will no longer fear the deep because you will know that even there, God walks with you. The psalm closes with freedom, not fear, and so should you. No matter what flood surrounds you now, lift your heart in silent gratitude. The waters are not your master, they are your witness. You will stand on dry ground again. You will rise, and your testimony will echo what David sang thousands of years ago. The snare is broken, the flood is gone, and you have escaped. If this message is speaking to your spirit right now, take a moment to subscribe to the channel so that each new word of revelation can continue to strengthen your faith, lift your soul, and remind you that every flood you face will one day become the story of your deliverance. The Lord was on our side, the invisible hand that turned the battle. When the psalmist declared, "If it had not been the Lord who was on our side," he was not making a poetic exaggeration. He was confessing a mystery that defines the entire journey of faith, that unseen interventions are the only reason the chosen survive the visible wars. The phrase repeats twice in the psalm, as though the writer needed the echo to settle into his bones. It is as if David is saying, "You don't understand. It was closer than you think. It wasn't luck. It wasn't timing. It wasn't strategy. It was the Lord." And indeed, when we reflect on our own lives, we see that our greatest escapes were not engineered by intellect or influence, but by divine interruption. Psalm 124 is a reminder that the history of every believer is a sequence of moments where God stepped in quietly yet decisively, altering the course of destruction. To say the Lord was on our side is to affirm that there exists a companionship that transcends visibility. The Hebrew word for on our side suggests for us, with us, and on behalf of us. It is not passive support, it is active defense. God does not simply watch his people struggle, he participates. There are battles you fought unaware that he fought beside you. When you were cornered, his presence became the wall behind you. When you were attacked, his shadow became your shield. This is not sentiment, it is spiritual reality. Divine alignment is what shifts outcomes that should have been final. The psalmist's gratitude comes from the revelation that all human effort would have failed had not the eternal hand tilted the balance. Consider how many moments in life could have ended differently. The accident that didn't happen, the conversation that changed everything, the door that closed and saved you from a worse path. These are not coincidences, but coded acts of mercy. God's fingerprints are everywhere, especially in the events you cannot explain. Sometimes his protection feels like disappointment. Sometimes his no is the armor that blocks a hidden attack. The side of the Lord is not always the comfortable side, but it is always the victorious one. David's entire reign was proof of this truth. He faced Saul's spears, Goliath's sword, Absalom's rebellion, and countless betrayals. Each time destruction seemed imminent. Each time an unseen force redirected the arrow, confused the enemy, or turned the situation into victory. The psalm is therefore a memorial of divine participation. To say the Lord was on our side is to admit that the human story of deliverance is impossible without divine authorship. This truth challenges the arrogance of self-sufficiency. We live in an age that glorifies independence, where people boast of surviving by their own strength. But Psalm 124 calls for humility, to acknowledge that survival itself is grace. If the Lord had not been on your side, you would not be reading this. You would not have endured the heartbreaks, the betrayals, the silent nights of despair. You would not have crossed the storms that came for your soul. There is an invisible hand that has been guiding you, protecting you, and at times even dragging you away from danger you were too blind to see. Think of moments when life made no sense, when every door closed, when those you trusted withdrew their support, when confusion clouded your vision. Those were the times when God was repositioning you. He was not absent, he was on your side, dismantling connections that would have ruined you, closing opportunities that would have corrupted you, redirecting your steps toward purpose. Divine alignment often looks like loss to those who cannot perceive eternity. Yet, once you reach the other side, you realize that everything you lost was protection in disguise. The phrase, on our side, also implies advocacy. God stands as your defender in the heavenly courts. There are accusations raised against your life daily, voices of condemnation, spiritual prosecutors reminding heaven of your failures. Yet Scripture says that Jesus stands as your intercessor, speaking a higher word: mercy, redemption, purpose. When the Lord is on your side, even your past cannot testify against you. He silences the accuser, cancels the sentence, and rewrites your destiny. This is the deepest deliverance, not just from external enemies, but from the internal voice that says you are unworthy of rescue. In the unseen world, battles rage constantly. Forces of darkness look for entry points: bitterness, pride, fear, disobedience, anything that can give them legal ground to operate. But when God is on your side, he covers your vulnerabilities. His blood speaks louder than your mistakes. His grace fills the gaps you cannot fill. That is why David's confidence was unshakable. He didn't rely on perfection, he relied on covenant. The same is true for you. God's favor is not earned. It is established by relationship. When he chooses to stand beside you, no power in heaven or earth can remove him. There is also a profound emotional dimension to this truth. Knowing that the Lord is on your side changes the psychology of fear. You stop measuring yourself against the magnitude of the problem and begin to measure the problem against the magnitude of your God. Fear loses authority when presence is realized. The awareness of divine companionship transforms every battlefield. You no longer see giants, you see opportunities for revelation. Every storm becomes a classroom in which God teaches you new dimensions of His strength. When you truly internalize that the Lord is on your side, you stop begging for survival and start walking in victory. Faith becomes your language. Prayer stops being desperation and becomes declaration. You begin to speak not as a victim trying to convince heaven to help, but as a covenant partner, reminding the universe that you are not alone. This is what Psalm 124 models. Not religious ritual, but spiritual confidence. The psalmist speaks in past tense because deliverance has already occurred. Likewise, your life carries countless invisible victories, already sealed by divine intervention. To grasp this mystery more fully, imagine two armies facing each other, one large, one small. The small one has no chance until the King of Heaven steps down into their ranks. Instantly the outcome changes. The enemies still shout, but their words lose power. The battle continues, but the victory is guaranteed. That is the imagery behind "the Lord was on our side." It means you may be outnumbered, but you are never outpowered. You may feel cornered, but the infinite stands beside you. Reflect on the subtle ways God has proven this truth in your life. There were people who planned your downfall, yet their plans fell apart mysteriously. There were seasons when resources vanished, yet provision appeared from nowhere. There were nights when anxiety screamed louder than faith, yet peace arrived without explanation. That is what it means to have the Lord on your side. He works silently, strategically, beyond human logic. His timing frustrates both the enemy and your impatience, but it is always perfect. When you accept this reality, gratitude becomes your atmosphere. You begin to live in awareness rather than assumption. You stop saying, "I was lucky," and start saying, "God intervened." You stop crediting coincidence and start recognizing divine orchestration. This awareness itself becomes protection, because the more you acknowledge His presence, the stronger His defense manifests around you. Gratitude is not just emotion, it is spiritual warfare. It seals the gates that doubt tries to open. Psalm 124 is, therefore, not only a reflection of past deliverance, but a strategy for future battles. Whenever you face new challenges, recall the phrase, "If it had not been the Lord who was on my side." Speak it aloud. Remind your soul of its history with God. Each repetition becomes a wall of remembrance that repels fear. It realigns your heart with the truth that you are never abandoned. You are protected even when unaware, guided even when lost, and loved even when failing. To have the Lord on your side also means that you are on His side. Alignment is mutual. You cannot invite His presence into battles that contradict His will. That is why obedience is the highest form of security. When you walk in His principles, you walk under His protection. Disobedience is spiritual exposure. It removes the covering that keeps you safe. David learned this repeatedly. When he aligned with God's commands, his enemies collapsed. When he strayed, the storms multiplied. The psalm is not just celebration, but confession, a realization that victory depends entirely on proximity to the divine will. In the modern world, this truth remains unchanged. Many are fighting battles without alignment. They use human reasoning, emotional strength, or worldly connections to escape spiritual traps, but none of these can substitute divine partnership. To have God on your side is not to use Him as backup, but to live under His leadership. When you surrender your plans to His direction, you invite a dimension of help that cannot fail. Heaven responds to submission faster than to ambition. Think also of how this principle applies collectively. Psalm 124 was not written by an individual for himself, but for a nation. If it had not been the Lord who was on our side, let Israel now say. Deliverance is communal. When a people align with God, their collective destiny is shielded. The same hand that saves one believer can rescue an entire generation. This is a call for intercession, to invite the Lord to stand beside families, cities, and nations drowning in chaos. His presence is still the only force that breaks cycles of destruction. The phrase also teaches endurance. Knowing that God is on your side doesn't mean battles disappear. It means they lose the power to define you. The believer who understands this walks through fire without panic, because he knows that divine companionship is fireproof. Daniel's friends were thrown into the furnace, yet the flame only revealed a fourth man walking with them. That fourth man is the living embodiment of Psalm 124, the proof that you are never alone in the heat. Look back over your life. You can trace invisible fingerprints through every season. In your childhood, accidents that could have ended your life missed by inches. In your youth, wrong choices that could have destroyed your future somehow redirected into wisdom. In adulthood, betrayals that could have hardened your heart instead deepened your faith. This is the quiet story behind your visible timeline. The Lord was on your side, and because He was, you escaped traps that generations before you could not. When you truly believe that God is on your side, fear loses its language. Anxiety collapses. You no longer see life as random but as divinely authored. You realize that even the mistakes you made were recycled into lessons that served your calling. God's loyalty transcends your failure. His presence does not depend on your perfection. It depends on His promise. He swore never to leave nor forsake you, and Psalm 124 stands as eternal evidence that He keeps His word. This awareness should produce not complacency, but courage. When you know that heaven backs you, you walk differently. You pray boldly, forgive easily, love freely, and move forward even when circumstances scream retreat. Faith becomes your default posture. You stop calculating your odds and start expecting intervention. You become dangerous to darkness because you understand your alignment. The enemy fears those who know God is on their side, because such people cannot be manipulated by fear. And yet this truth also humbles. For to have the Lord on your side is to recognize you did nothing to deserve it. It is pure mercy. David understood this deeply. He was not perfect, far from it. Yet every time he repented, God restored him. The relationship remained unbroken because grace prevailed. The same grace covers you today. You may stumble, but His hand lifts you. You may wander, but His voice calls you home. Your deliverance does not depend on flawless behavior, but on relentless mercy. Therefore, when you face your next battle, do not panic. The Lord who was on your side in the past has not changed sides. His loyalty is eternal. He is still for you, still with you, still fighting through unseen dimensions to secure your destiny. The traps may multiply, the floods may rise, but His covenant remains. Your story is already written in victory because the author of creation signed His name beside yours. Take this moment to breathe in the weight of that truth. You are not alone. The invisible hand that guided David through his enemies is guiding you through yours. You will not fall into the snares of deceit. You will not drown in the waters of despair. You will not be swallowed by the mouth of destruction. The Lord is on your side, and that reality is enough to silence every other voice. If these words have awakened something in you, a remembrance of how many times God has carried you, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, because each message here will remind you of the same truth. You are not alone, you are covered, and the Lord who stood on your side once will stand with you again and again until your journey is complete. Our soul has escaped as a bird, the mystery of supernatural release. When the psalmist declares, "Our soul has escaped as a bird out of the snare of the fowlers," he is describing an event both natural and supernatural. It is an image that vibrates with spiritual meaning. The bird is fragile, weightless, vulnerable to traps set by those who know how to disguise them. The fowler is patient, strategic, and skilled in concealment. Between these two realities, the delicate bird and the hidden hunter, there exists a tension that defines human life. We are the bird, wandering, searching for nourishment, often unaware of the dangers beneath our feet. The traps represent every hidden mechanism of bondage, every invisible scheme of darkness designed to limit freedom, silence the song, and end the flight. And yet the psalmist proclaims something extraordinary. The snare is broken and the soul has escaped. This declaration is not merely about survival, it is about transformation. When the bird escapes, it doesn't return to the ground. It takes flight higher than before. It carries within its wings the memory of captivity and the taste of freedom. Likewise, when the human soul is delivered by divine intervention, it does not return to old patterns. True deliverance is not just an escape from danger, but an elevation into destiny. The phrase, "our soul has escaped," suggests that something within, something eternal, has been liberated from a prison it didn't even know it was in. Traps are often mental before they are physical. The mind becomes the first cage. Fear builds its walls, guilt locks the door, and shame guards the exit. Many live with invisible snares around their thoughts, repeating cycles of self-doubt and self-sabotage. They desire flight, but cannot lift off because the net is emotional, woven from experiences that taught them to mistrust freedom. In such moments, divine intervention is not just needed, it is the only way out. For the snare that binds the soul cannot be broken by effort, it must be shattered by grace. The Psalm's imagery invites reflection on how God releases people. A bird caught in a snare struggles until exhaustion sets in. It twists, flutters, and fights, but its strength becomes its weakness. The harder it tries, the tighter the cord pulls. Only when an external hand intervenes can the bird truly go free. This is the mystery of salvation itself. Humanity fights for liberation through intellect, achievement, or ritual, yet none of these efforts truly break the net. Freedom comes when the divine hand reaches down and declares, "Enough." One touch, one moment of divine will, and what held you for years loses its grip instantly. This kind of release is not always visible to others. From the outside, the bird may look the same, but something within it has changed. The fear of the net is gone. The trauma of captivity becomes a testimony. You may still walk among those who knew your old story, but you carry a new fragrance, an invisible peace that no one can explain. That is what supernatural escape feels like. Silent, complete, irreversible. The soul recognizes it before the body does. There are times when the traps that bind us come disguised as blessings, a relationship that feels comforting but drains your identity, a job that brings wealth but suffocates your spirit, an ambition that gives status but erodes joy. The enemy's traps are not always made of suffering. Sometimes they are built from false security. Yet God, in His mercy, allows discomfort to grow within these illusions until the heart can no longer pretend. That discomfort is not punishment, it is preparation for release. When you begin to feel restless in what used to satisfy you, it may be because your wings are being prepared for a new altitude. The phrase, "our soul has escaped," implies divine timing. The bird does not break the net prematurely. It escapes when the snare breaks. There is a divine rhythm to liberation. Sometimes God allows the tension to build until you recognize that freedom is not an option, but a necessity. You learn that the net you tolerate becomes the prison you inhabit. Deliverance begins the moment you stop making peace with what limits you. The psalm reveals that once the soul recognizes captivity, heaven moves to intervene. What follows is a breaking, A sudden, decisive act where the net that once seemed indestructible collapses without explanation. When God breaks a snare, it is not a gradual unraveling. It is an event. The cords snap, the structure fails, the grip loosens. One moment the bird is trapped, the next it is flying. This immediacy is part of the psalm's power. It reminds us that divine intervention is not bound by process. A single encounter can undo years of oppression. A single revelation can reverse generations of bondage. The soul, once touched by divine light, cannot remain in darkness. There are countless types of snares, addictions, toxic habits, ancestral patterns, spiritual covenants, lies we believed about ourselves. Each one operates with the same goal, to prevent flight. Yet each one is subject to the same outcome when confronted by divine truth. The snare does not have to be analyzed to be broken. It only needs to be exposed to the presence of the Lord. In that presence, the cords lose their strength. In that presence, what once seemed impossible becomes inevitable. The bird is also symbolic of the spirit's capacity to rise. Birds have always represented transcendence, the ability to move between realms, to soar above the landscape of limitation. When the psalmist says, "Our soul has escaped as a bird," he is declaring that deliverance lifts you into a new atmosphere. You no longer breathe the same air as those who remain trapped in fear. You no longer feed on the same thoughts. Your vision changes, your desires transform. You begin to see life from above, not from within the cage. Every soul that has experienced true deliverance carries an instinct for freedom. It can no longer endure compromise. The bird that has tasted the sky cannot survive on the ground. That is why spiritual growth often isolates you. Those still comfortable in the cage may call your flight arrogance, but they do not understand. You are not rejecting them. You are obeying the wind that calls you higher. The sound of the Spirit is like an invisible current, drawing you away from familiar traps toward the vastness of divine purpose. There is a tenderness in the way God orchestrates escape. He does not break the net to expose the bird. He breaks it to restore its song. When your soul escapes, the first sign of freedom is the return of praise. The silence that captivity created gives way to worship. You find yourself singing again, perhaps quietly at first, but sincerely. This song is not for performance. It is gratitude given shape. Every believer who has escaped something understands this. Words cannot describe it, but the soul knows, I am free. Freedom, however, carries responsibility. To be delivered is not to return to danger, but to stay aware of it. Many who escape once fall again because they forget the lessons of the net. They fly near the same ground, land near the same traps, and find themselves entangled once more. True deliverance matures into discernment. You learn to recognize patterns, voices, and atmospheres that smell like captivity. The bird learns to see the hunter's footprints in the dust. Likewise, the believer learns to sense deception before it manifests. This is the wisdom of the free, flight without forgetfulness. When the psalmist says, our soul has escaped, he speaks not as an individual but as part of a community. Deliverance is never isolated. When one escapes, others are inspired to believe that freedom is possible. Testimony becomes contagious. The story of one broken snare gives courage to another trapped heart. In this way, the escape of a single soul becomes the liberation of many. This is how revival begins, not with noise, but with freedom. One person breaks free, then another, until the air is filled with wings. Let us not overlook the word soul. It is not the body that escapes first, but the inner self. You may still live among old conditions, but your soul can already be free. Freedom always begins internally. The mind shifts, the heart forgives, the spirit rises. When this happens, circumstances lose authority. You realize that the snare was never stronger than your surrender to God. Once you release control, heaven takes command. The soul that yields is the soul that escapes. This psalm also reveals something profound about the nature of divine warfare. Notice that the fowler's skill is not enough to keep the bird once God decides to act. Every demonic plan, every manipulative person, every curse loses power the moment God intervenes. There are traps set for you that will never activate because His presence nullifies their design. You will walk safely through fields filled with nets because an invisible hand clears them before you arrive. This is not imagination. It is spiritual reality. Angels move ahead of you, breaking cords, confusing hunters, dismantling snares. That is why many believers look back years later and realize how many near disasters never happened. The escape was invisible, but it was real. Sometimes the greatest snares are internal agreements, those moments when we align with fear, hopelessness, or resentment. These emotional contracts create spiritual nets, but when truth enters, those agreements are cancelled. The bird of the soul reclaims its sky. Freedom begins in repentance, the turning of the heart toward light. When you renounce what once defined you, the cords that fed on your consent lose power. That is why confession is liberation. It dismantles the legal rights of darkness. You speak truth, and the net disintegrates. Imagine the feeling of the bird in the moment of release, the rush of wind under its wings, the sudden expansion of space, the sunlight piercing through. That sensation mirrors what happens in the spirit when deliverance occurs. The constriction of fear gives way to breath. The heaviness of guilt transforms into peace. The blindness of confusion opens into vision. You feel lighter, not because circumstances changed instantly, but because your soul remembers its design. You were made to fly, to worship, to trust, to move without chains. Freedom is not new, it is original. Captivity is the interruption. Liberation is restoration. Yet every escape also requires direction. The bird must not only flee, but know where to go. Freedom without purpose becomes wandering. That is why God does not release you into emptiness. He releases you into calling. After every deliverance, there is an assignment. The psalmist's escape was followed by testimony. The snare is broken, and we are escaped. And the purpose of freedom is proclamation. You tell the world what God has done, not to boast, but to announce that nets do not last forever. Think of how many people need to hear that message today, those trapped in depression, addiction, fear, or regret. Your story of escape becomes their map. You become a living psalm, a visible proof that God still breaks snares. The more you speak it, the more the atmosphere changes around you. Freedom multiplies through words of gratitude. Each declaration becomes like wind lifting another soul. The imagery of the bird also teaches about vulnerability. Birds cannot defend themselves with strength. They depend on awareness and agility. Likewise, spiritual life thrives not through arrogance, but through sensitivity. The closer you stay to God, the quicker you discern danger. The bird that flies near the hunter's ground is easily caught. The bird that soars higher escapes sight. That height represents intimacy with God, prayer, worship, obedience. The more time you spend in His presence, the less reachable you become to darkness. Elevation is protection. There are seasons when God Himself hides you, teaching you to fly in secret before showing you to the world. The bird may escape, but then rest in silence, regaining strength before returning to open skies. Do not confuse this rest with stagnation. Sometimes divine hiding is part of the escape. God shields you from visibility until your wings are healed. The world may forget you for a season, but heaven watches you recover. When the time comes, He will command you to fly again, not as a victim, but as a testimony of restoration. Freedom also requires discipline. The bird must learn not to linger near the places of old captivity. Likewise, those delivered must guard their minds from nostalgia for what once enslaved them. Sometimes people romanticize the very situations God rescued them from. They call bondage comfort because it is familiar. True freedom means choosing discomfort over chains, growth over safety, and faith over control. The bird must trust the air again, and so must you. Deliverance brings with it a new form of warfare, the challenge of maintaining liberty. The enemy cannot recapture what God has freed, but he can attempt deception. He will whisper that the net still exists, that the sky is dangerous, that the ground is safer. Many believers live beneath their potential because they listen to these lies. The key to sustained freedom is remembrance. Keep declaring, "The snare is broken." Say it until your mind believes it. Say it until fear loses its voice. There is a beauty in how this psalm shifts tone. It begins with danger, but ends with victory. The transition happens in one verse. Our soul has escaped. This is the power of revelation. One moment of understanding changes everything. You realize that the story was never about the strength of the hunter, but about the mercy of the Redeemer. The focus moves from fear to faith, from trap to triumph. That shift is the essence of spiritual maturity, seeing deliverance not as an event, but as an identity. To live as one who has escaped means to live with gratitude, awareness, and purpose. Gratitude keeps the heart soft, awareness keeps the eyes open, and purpose keeps the wings steady. Each day becomes an act of worship. Every breath becomes thanksgiving. You begin to notice that even in flight, the air around you carries divine orchestration. The same God who broke the snare continues to guide your direction. The final lesson of this verse is permanence. The snare, once broken, cannot be repaired. The bird's escape is final. The enemy may try new traps, but the old one is destroyed. Likewise, when God delivers you from a specific bondage, that chain is permanently nullified. The record of captivity is erased from the spiritual archives. The accuser loses his evidence. You are not a freed prisoner, you are a citizen of freedom. Every time you feel fear returning, remember this truth. The snare is broken. The same God who shattered that trap will shatter the next. You do not live in cycles of defeat, you live in progression of victory. What was once a limitation becomes a memory of mercy. You will never be the same again because freedom rewrites identity. You are no longer the one who almost perished, you are the one who escaped. Let your soul rejoice in that. The bird's flight is not only escape, it is praise. Every wing beat declares, "I am free because God remembered me." You carry that testimony into every season of life. And as you soar, remember that there are others still caught in nets of despair. Your flight becomes their hope, your voice becomes their song, and your story becomes living proof that when the Lord decides to intervene, no snare can stand. If these words have spoken to your heart, if you too feel that your soul has escaped something invisible, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Each message here is meant to remind you of your wings, to strengthen your spirit, and to help you stay in the freedom that God Himself has given you, far above every snare and beyond every limit. Our help is in the name of the Lord, the eternal source of deliverance. At the end of Psalm 124, the psalmist brings all of his reflections to a single truth that holds everything together. Our help is in the name of the Lord, who made heaven and earth. This verse is not just a conclusion, it is the heartbeat of the entire psalm. It explains why the traps failed, why the floods did not drown, and why the soul escaped. The power behind every deliverance is not circumstance, luck, or human strength. It is the name of the Lord, the manifestation of divine authority that commands creation itself. This final declaration moves the focus from experience to essence. It reminds us that every form of help that is not rooted in God is temporary, but the help that flows from His name is eternal. The psalm begins with peril and ends with peace. Between those 2 points lies a journey of revelation, and this final line reveals the source of all strength. To say our help is in the name of the Lord is to acknowledge that no rescue is authentic unless it originates from divine will. Human intervention may alleviate symptoms, but only God removes causes. The psalmist has seen nations rise against him, floods threaten him, traps ensnare him, and yet each time one thing remained constant. Help came not from men, but from heaven. This understanding transforms how we interpret every struggle. Trouble becomes not a signal of abandonment, but an invitation to witness divine assistance. The name of the Lord is not a label, it is a presence. In biblical thought, a name represents essence, authority, and character. To call on the name of the Lord is to invoke His nature, His promises, His faithfulness. When the psalmist says, "Our help is in His name," he is declaring that the very identity of God guarantees deliverance. God cannot deny Himself. Therefore, those who call upon His name are covered by His covenant. This truth echoes through Scripture. The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous run to it and are safe. The tower is not physical. It is spiritual refuge. The name itself becomes the fortress. To trust in the name of the Lord means to shift reliance from visible systems to invisible sovereignty. It is easy to believe in what we can see: armies, wealth, influence, relationships. But all of these are fragile when storms come. The psalmist had learned through pain that every human support can crumble, but the name of God remains unshaken. When everything else failed, that name stood. It became a wall in battle, a shelter in persecution, and a compass in confusion. This is why he ends the psalm not by thanking men or celebrating strategies, but by exalting the Lord. Gratitude that stops at the human level is incomplete. True gratitude rises to the source. The phrase, "who made heaven and earth," expands the scope of divine help. It means the one who assists you is not limited by creation, for He is the Creator. The same God who set galaxies in motion bends low to rescue one soul. The vastness of His power does not make Him distant. It ensures that no situation is beyond His reach. When you say, "My help is in the name of the Lord," you're not merely making a statement of faith, you're aligning your life with the Creator's order. You're acknowledging that the one who designed the universe is actively involved in the details of your existence. This awareness transforms prayer from pleading into partnership. You are not asking a distant deity to notice you. You are communing with the architect of all things, who already knows the blueprint of your life. There is something profoundly personal in this declaration. Our help is collective, yet intimate. The psalmist speaks for a people, but the resonance reaches each heart individually. It tells every believer, you are not forgotten, and your struggles are not too small for divine attention. The same God who shaped constellations also counts your tears. The one who commands angels also defends your soul. When you begin to see God in this light, fear loses its legitimacy. You realize that if He made heaven and earth, then the problem before you is nothing but dust under His feet. To live with this revelation is to carry peace in every circumstance. Anxiety thrives where trust is absent, but once you truly understand that your help is in God's name, worry dissolves. You begin to see divine fingerprints in what others call coincidences. You interpret delays as divine protection and detours as divine direction. Nothing is wasted when the Creator is your ally. Even your mistakes become material for redemption. He rearranges chaos into order, turning pain into purpose. This is not poetic optimism, it is divine logic. The one who made everything can remake anything. The name of the Lord is not static, it is active power. Throughout Scripture, people experience different facets of that name depending on their need. To Abraham, he was Jehovah Jireh, the Lord who provides. To Moses, he was I am, the self-existent one who becomes whatever is necessary. To David, he was the shepherd, the shield, the fortress. Each encounter revealed a dimension of his help. When the psalmist declares that help is in the Lord's name, he is summarizing all of these experiences. Every attribute of God, his mercy, his justice, his strength, his wisdom, is contained in that name. To call upon it is to access the totality of divine resources. The challenge is that many invoke God's name without understanding its depth. They repeat words without faith and wonder why nothing changes. The power of the name is unlocked through relationship, not ritual. You cannot use the name of the Lord as a formula. It must flow from intimacy. When you know him personally, the name becomes alive in your mouth. Heaven recognizes the voice of those who walk with God. Their prayers carry authority because they echo the heart of the one they serve. The difference between superstition and faith is intimacy. To those who know him, his name is not just protection, it is identity. They move through life as representatives of that name. This psalm teaches that deliverance is not random, it follows recognition. The moment you acknowledge that your help comes from God alone, you realign yourself with heaven's order. Pride collapses, dependence increases, and miracles begin. God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. The humble are those who confess, I cannot save myself. That confession is not weakness, it is wisdom. When you admit your need, you create space for God's power. Divine help fills the vacuum left by human surrender. Every major deliverance begins with that admission. Let us reflect on the phrase, our help. The word help in Hebrew carries the sense of assistance that comes in motion, an active intervention. It is not passive sympathy. God does not merely feel sorry for his people. He moves. He enters situations, shifts atmospheres, and rearranges outcomes. When you declare that your help is in the Lord, you are not resigning to fate. You are activating divine movement. The psalmist understood that prayer is not begging, but alignment. To call on the name of the Lord is to pull eternity into time, to open a channel where divine purpose flows into human circumstance. This understanding transforms how you view crisis. What looks like an ending is often a setup for divine manifestation. The Lord allows situations to reach their breaking point so that his intervention is undeniable. If human strength could still boast, glory would be misplaced. But when the snare breaks and everyone knows it was impossible, only then does the name of the Lord receive full honor. That is why some delays exist, to ensure that when help comes, no one else can take credit. God waits until the stage is empty of human saviors so that his glory can stand alone. When the psalmist says, "Our help is in the name of the Lord," he is also contrasting this divine dependence with the illusions of human alliances. Nations around Israel trusted in idols, armies, and wealth. But these forms of power always failed under pressure. The psalmist's declaration is therefore countercultural. It defies worldly logic and asserts that true security lies not in strength, but in surrender. In a world obsessed with control, the believer's confidence comes from yielding. That paradox is the essence of faith, finding freedom in dependence, victory in surrender, and strength in weakness. To live this way requires continual remembrance. The human heart drifts easily towards self-reliance. Gratitude fades, and we begin to believe that our achievements are self-made. But every breath is borrowed, every heartbeat sustained by grace. When you remember this, humility becomes natural. You begin each day acknowledging that without divine help, even the smallest task can collapse. This awareness does not breed fear, it births reverence. You approach life not as a battle to be won by effort, but as a partnership with God's will. This partnership is visible throughout Scripture. Moses lifted his hands, and the Red Sea parted. Joshua marched around Jericho, and the walls fell. Esther fasted, and a nation was spared. None of these victories were logical. They were the fruit of reliance on divine help. The pattern is consistent. Human weakness meets divine strength, and miracles occur. The same principle governs your life. Every victory you have ever experienced is the intersection of obedience and grace. You acted, but God empowered the action. You spoke, but He gave the word. You stepped, but He made the ground firm. That awareness sustains humility even in success. Sometimes divine help does not appear as immediate rescue, but as inner peace. There are seasons when God's greatest assistance is not the removal of pain, but the infusion of endurance. He strengthens you to walk through what others collapse under. That too is help. When the psalmist says, "our help," he is including both rescue and resilience. The same name that breaks snares also sustains patience. Deliverance is not always escape. Sometimes it is empowerment to stand. Both are miracles of the same hand. This understanding redefines how we interpret unanswered prayers. Silence from heaven is not absence, it is preparation. The God who made heaven and earth operates on eternal timing. What seems like delay is often alignment. He adjusts circumstances, matures your heart, and orchestrates the perfect moment for manifestation. When the breakthrough finally comes, it fits seamlessly into His purpose. Every second of waiting becomes meaningful. You realize that divine help is not random but deliberate, crafted with the precision of the Creator who formed galaxies out of nothing. The phrase, "who made heaven and earth," also implies authority over both realms, the visible and the invisible. This means your help is not limited to material solutions. God moves in the unseen first, dismantling spiritual obstacles that humans cannot perceive. By the time you see the change in the natural, it has already been settled in the spiritual. Prayer operates within this principle. You may not see instant results, but heaven is already at work. The psalmist knew that the Creator's involvement guaranteed success, because the one who built reality itself cannot be overpowered within it. To place your trust in the name of the Lord is to enter a covenant of preservation. You are not exempt from challenges, but you are protected from defeat. The enemy may roar, the waters may rise, the nets may tighten, but none can overturn divine decree. The Creator's word is law to creation. If He declares you free, no chain can hold you. If He calls you blessed, no curse can reverse it. The authority of His name is absolute. It is written into the structure of existence. When you stand under that authority, you become untouchable in purpose. This is why the psalm concludes with worship. After recounting danger, fear, and deliverance, David ends with awe. He looks back and realizes that everything that happened was not random chaos, but divine choreography. Each crisis revealed a new dimension of God's help. Each escape unveiled another layer of His name. The psalm becomes not a lament, but a song of victory. It invites every generation to remember that their survival, too, is proof of divine partnership. We are all living testimonies of the same truth. Our help has always been and will always be in the name of the Lord. In our modern age, this truth remains vital. Technology, knowledge, and wealth have advanced, but the human soul still faces the same traps: fear, pride, greed, despair. No invention can rescue the spirit from itself. The help humanity needs cannot be engineered, it must be received. The Psalm's message is therefore timeless. Whether in ancient battlefields or digital societies, deliverance still comes from the same source. The name of the Lord still breaks nets, still calms floods, still restores souls. His nature has not changed, only our awareness fluctuates. When you begin to live daily with this awareness, everything changes. You pray differently, think differently, and even walk differently. Confidence replaces anxiety because you know who stands behind you. You stop begging life to be kind and start trusting that grace governs your journey. Even when storms come, you see them as settings for divine revelation. You no longer fear being overwhelmed because you know the name that commands the waters. There is also a communal aspect to this truth. The psalmist uses our help, not my help. Deliverance is collective. The victories of one believer strengthen the faith of another. The testimony of a single escape becomes a national anthem of gratitude. When one person declares, "Our help is in the name of the Lord," others remember their own stories. The words echo through generations, binding a people together in shared faith. That is the purpose of testimony, to remind the community that God's help is not limited to one moment or one person. It is an eternal stream flowing through time, touching every heart that calls upon His name. To end with this phrase is to return to the beginning of faith itself. All spiritual life begins with the recognition of need. We are finite. He is infinite. We are dust. He is creator. And yet, He chooses to be our help. This is the scandal of grace, that the Maker of heaven and earth bends low to lift the fallen, to heal the broken, to guide the lost. Every act of deliverance is a whisper of that love. Every broken snare is an echo of that mercy. Every peaceful night after a storm is evidence that the Creator has not abandoned His creation. You may be facing a situation now that feels unmovable. A trap too tight, a storm too fierce, a silence too long. Remember this psalm: your help is not in the opinions of others, nor in your own strength. Your help is in the name that spoke galaxies into being. If He could separate light from darkness, He can separate you from despair. If He could form mountains, He can form new beginnings. The one who made heaven and earth does not lose track of the lives He sustains. Every breath you take is proof that He is still working. So lift your eyes. The same God who rescued David watches over you. The same hand that broke ancient nets still breaks modern chains. The same voice that calmed the Red Sea still speaks to your storm. Your deliverance is not an if, it is a when. For the psalmist did not say, "Our help was," but "Our help is." Present tense. Eternal truth. The name of the Lord remains an active refuge for all generations. When you understand this, you begin to live with gratitude that cannot be silenced. Every moment becomes worship. Every difficulty becomes a reminder that help is near. You realize that even before you call, God has already begun to answer. His presence is not something you need to summon. It surrounds you already. The Creator walks with His creation. That is the mystery of faith, the infinite dwelling with the finite, the eternal helping the temporary, the divine rescuing the human. Let your heart rest in that assurance. No snare will outsmart Him, no flood will outrun Him, no darkness will outlast Him. The Maker of heaven and earth is your defender, your provider, your guide. You are safe not because you are strong, but because He is faithful. That faithfulness is your inheritance, your identity, your peace. If this truth has spoken to your spirit, take a moment to subscribe to the channel, because each message here carries the same heartbeat as this psalm, to remind you that your help is not far away. It is in the eternal name of the Lord, who made heaven and earth, and who will never fail those who trust in Him.